Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Melbourne Traditionalist podcast 28. I have with me David Hiscock from XYZ. How are you, Dave?
Very good, Mark. Thanks for having me. You're looking very well. You haven't been coughing or like you're sneezing like the last week or so?
Well, the weather has changed a little bit, so I have actually been coughing. But,
really?
Yeah. But not very much.
Yeah, okay. You're not looking too pale, not too sweaty. No, you're okay.
I feel all right.
You're okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And do you feel all right?
I'm feeling pretty good. I've got a pretty good immune system, but, you know, I wouldn't know if I had anything because apparently you can walk around with these things and, you know, spread them to other people and then you find out. So but I think I'm okay. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
We are going to talk a little bit later about the coronavirus, but I wanted to tell you about a letter that I received today on my way here. So I wasn't very happy to receive this. I got a letter from Vic Roads. Mm-hmm. And Vic Roads is the organisation, the government organisation that looks after the roads, and you pay your car insurance or car registration to them.
Yeah, and apparently their headquarters in the city, it's just one giant pyramid.
And so this letter,
and they have this big emblazoned sign up the front saying congestion is freedom.
Yeah, I can't believe that. Yeah. And so this letter is addressed to me. It says Mark Moncrief, and then it starts, "Dear Sir, Madam." I mean,
dear Sir or Madam.
Dear Sir, Madam. Yeah. And this is the state we live in.
Oh dear.
Where
you can't get past the introduction without
So apparently, I paid online. I paid for my car registration.
Yes.
And apparently, I paid the concession price instead of the correct price.
Yes.
All right. So I made a mistake. All right, fine. So they've sent me a letter saying, "Hey, you owe us more money." So obviously, I'm not very happy with that, even though they're in the right.
But at least they didn't assume your gender.
Yeah. All right. Now, human beings do not have genders.
True. Gender is actually a social contract.
Gender is a social construct.
There's sex.
That's right.
Yes.
I have a sex. I have a biological sex.
Yes.
I am a man. Hear me roar. Now, further on in the letter, it says that if you don't pay, I've got to pay by the 28th of February. Mm-hmm. All right. And if I don't pay, then I've got 14 days, and after that, basically, I'm breaking the law. All right.
So really, they give me... You've got 2 weeks into March. Yeah.
Exactly. So they've given me, a month? So I've paid $690 out of $840. Uh-huh. So that I'm just rounding off the figures. So I owe $151. Uh-huh. All right. They give me 6 weeks, and then it gets cut off. But I've paid 80% of the fee. Mm-hmm. Surely that would mean that I got 9 or 10 months or something.
Oh, yes.
But instead they give me a month to pay.
Are you tempted to pay them $150 just to see what will happen?
Well, that's all I have to do. I have to pay the difference.
Oh, whatever. Rather than paying them 151, pay them 150.
No, because that's what breeds these bureaucracies. Yeah. Is these petty little rules.
Yes,
it's so annoying. But this is the problem: is that if it had been paid in cash, like we used to pay things, mm-hmm. then this wouldn't have happened.
Because they would have told you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right, and I could have shouted at someone in real life, but instead, I have to, not shout at you, which is really. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
So I hope everyone enjoyed that letter because I didn't.
You could send them an angry letter in response, but then you have to write it up, proofread it, send it, and then you never know if somebody's going to cry over it or not. So.
Yeah, exactly. Because I won't write it to "Dear Sir, Madam."
Personally, I identify as a battleship. I identify as a carrier strike group, actually.
Oh, an
Yeah.
entire strike group.
Yes, I'm assembling the parts so that I can make my transition.
Now, are you going to strike Wuhan in China?
Well, it has been suggested that the only way to be sure is to take off and nuke the source from orbit. Yes.
I have heard this, and I thought to myself, no, that's not a good idea.
No? One of my favourite memes, actually, is that there's a guy going, why is there only one aeroplane coming to rescue us? And then in the next couple of screens, it just fades to white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Scott Morrison, once again, was criticised for sending Australian citizens who are coming from China
Yes.
into quarantine on Christmas Island,
Yes.
which sounds quite sensible to me.
Putting people in camps. I love the sound of it. Yeah. There was also a Chinese guy who's a Liberal MP or senator who was complaining that Chinese people are getting profiled as being likely to have not SARS, the coronavirus.
Yep.
Yeah. Which I think is quite funny because when you look at where the epicenter is, it's China.
Exactly, it's China.
When you look at the places where coronavirus has spread to, apart from other cities in China, it's places where Chinese people are and have travelled to from China.
That's right. And you wrote in your piece on this that it mostly affects Chinese men.
Yes. Well, yeah, Vox Day linked to the actual study done on it, and they looked at the genes, and they looked at who's more susceptible to the actual virus, and they're Chinese men.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Vox Day suggested that, all that these people have to do is just identify as black women and they'll be fine. The point is, like,
in this crazy world, yes.
Yeah, it's and this is for me, this is the heart of the matter. You may not care about race, but race cares about you. And in this particular instance, coronavirus literally cares very deeply.
We don't often
about
paraphrase
race.
Trotsky, but we are now.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got an actual genetic link between a disease and a race.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, this happens all the time in the medical world, and we're just pretending that it's not real.
Yes, absolutely. Like, yes, there's that great thing about I think IQ.
Yeah. Now, you were talking about the cafe in Sydney.
Yeah. Well, this. I guess we're still sort of talking around this and then really getting to the heart of why I find this topic really interesting at the moment. So yeah, a cafe in Sydney. I think just one of the staff just wrote a joke.
Yep.
On the cafe saying, coronavirus is made in China, so it won't last, just like everything else that's made there. It's actually, it's quite funny.
I laughed at it.
I laughed. It's a dad joke, so I like it. Yeah. And it's great because, like compared to the actual flu, that kills tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people every year, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. In Australia, I think hundreds of people died last year from the flu.
Yep.
And there were... Yeah, it was one of the most severe flu outbreaks that we've had. So, like, on the grand scale of things, it may not be that big. Unless, actually, of course, David Hilton over Ed Times Herald has pointed out that the actual number of cases may actually be much higher, and also the number of deaths from it may be much higher.
Well, that's true. You cannot always trust what's coming out of China.
Yeah, there's just this little thing about that, I don't. And like they've said, look, they are undersupplied in testing kits, so there could be a lot more people there. And it might be in their interests to avoid panic, just to like dispose of a lot of the bodies. Also, it occurred to me, like when I saw footage of people literally just dropping in the streets, it occurred to me that people might actually be scared of going to the hospital and reporting themselves as having coronavirus because they'd be worried that they're just going to be done in. I think that could be a very genuine fear. So I have reason to suspect, I think there are good reasons to suspect that the coronavirus is actually much bigger than it actually is.
Yep.
But back to the cafe, I love the fact that, they're just making light of it. It's a funny joke. It's how we used to integrate the tiny proportion of foreigners that we would have in our country. We would all make jokes about our race. But this is the thing about the coronavirus. Like when you look at the fact that like Chinese men are genetically more disposed to catching it. B, all the places where it's spread to are the places where Chinese people are.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously this is a Chinese disease.
Yeah.
It's like there's a century's worth of Marxist programming that's just been there's a switch that's been flicked in us just overnight, just like that, and it just undoes that century of programming, where we realize all of a sudden, hang on, we've got to be wary of the Chinese. They might actually have a disease that can kill us.
Yep.
Yeah. They can complain all they want about profiling. But that's because, yes, we're profiling because we want to stay alive.
Well,
it's a survival instinct.
Traditionally, it's the someone from the Liberal Party who will complain about that.
Yes.
We can always count on the right Liberals to come out and talk about how it's bad for business that we profile people.
Mm-hmm.
And changing the subject slightly, because we're still talking about the Liberal Party. The state Liberal Party wants to ban Nazi symbols in public.
Yes.
So there's been a small country town and some locals there decided to fly a fake Nazi flag. And so it's got a swastika on it, but it's got all these other paraphernalia on it. So it's not a real flag. It's a made-up flag. And so the locals complained. I probably would have complained too. And they said, "Nah, go away." And now the state government's saying, "Hey, we want to stop this from happening." So they're going to change the law so you can't have these symbols about. So bit by bit, we become more and more controlled.
Yes.
Because now that they want to ban this, well, what happens to authentic memorabilia?
Oh, yes.
You know, so you have a Nazi dagger that's got a swastika on it. Well, are you allowed to collect that or not?
Probably not.
You know,
Yeah.
what about badges and things like that? And then of course we start erasing history, because that's what you're doing.
Yes.
You're actually erasing history, and you're pretending that this stuff didn't happen. You're distorting history. So I worked with a guy, and he was a modeler, and he bought this model aeroplane, and it came from a company in Europe, and it was a German World War II plane, and on the tail they would actually have a swastika.
Yes.
Right? Now in the box it had all the decals or decals that you could put onto the plane. Doesn't include the swastika, because in Europe you're not allowed to sell swastikas.
Yeah. Do you know what?
So what happens is he then has to go and order from a British company a set of just swastika decals.
So that he can put them on his...
Yeah, so right. So he has more swastikas than he will ever need in his whole life.
And then he's like, hey, I should start up a club.
So you have these bizarre ideas where, we'll get rid of swastikas from real life. But actually what happens is people then go out and say, hey, I want this symbol. And they have to buy more of them than they practically need. So you actually create more of the thing that you said you were trying to ban.
That's typical of regulation, isn't it?
Yes.
It always produces the opposite response. When I was a kid, because one of the ways I got into history was my fascination with aeroplanes and the Battle of Britain, and then just like air battles, all that stuff. So I used to draw. I think I used to start off drawing Spitfires and Hurricanes, and then I started like inventing my own versions of World War II aircraft, which was a lot of fun. And so what I noticed, like, when they would show the photos of the aces next to their aircraft, whether they showed the photos of a German ace, and like you would have the Germans always had hundreds of victories, and the British always had like dozens. So the Germans would have hundreds of like British insignias on the tail of their aircraft, of their Messerschmitts, and the British, they would always have dozens of swastikas.
Yep.
And so I used to draw Spitfires and Hurricanes, and I would I was always jealous that the British guys would have less kills because they would be retired early. That was just the policy of the RAF. And so I would always draw hundreds of swastikas on these aircraft. And so my grandmother, because I'd drawn them on a holiday down at Phillip Island, and I'd left them there. And my grandmother found them, and the next time I saw her, she was like, "Oh, somebody drew all these aircraft with all these specifications of all the weapons they had, and they had swastikas on them. I had to throw them all out." so I think she thought there was something wrong with me. And I was just a boy.
And there's the thing about, when you see these, someone put a swastika on the toilet wall, or someone put a swastika on the synagogue or whatever, and it's always badly drawn.
Yes.
And if you have any interest in World War II or the Nazis, you know how to draw a swastika.
Yes, and I think a genuine National Socialist, if they were going to draw a swastika, would make sure it's drawn the right way.
Yeah.
And that brings suspicion to a lot of the incidences of these, just on that factor alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That erasing of history, that's... Yeah. I know I'm tangenting again. What's going on with Margaret Court at the moment, and the fact that they actually have an arena named after her, and the SJWs are saying we should change the name of it.
Yep.
It's very unfortunate for them that it's the anniversary of her winning all those...
50 years.
Yeah. And just the greatest tennis player that Australia's ever had, or that's ever lived. Even though women should not be allowed to play professional sport or amateur sport, and women should not be pastors of churches, I will give Margaret Court a pass on this. But there's a piece that I may put up where, thanks to Ryan Fletcher, we've got pictures of Margaret Court with some other tennis players, and then we've airbrushed her out of there. And so it's a little bit Soviet what's going on at the moment. I saw a headline where they were talking about how the current players have been should be applauded basically for how sensitively they've approached the issue of Margaret Court.
It's really Orwellian, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're right. We shouldn't use the word Orwellian. We should use the word Soviet.
Yes, it's Soviet.
It's very Soviet.
Yeah.
This is yesterday's hero, and we don't talk about yesterday's hero, and we airbrush them out of history, and we pretend that they don't exist. And Tennis Australia did an incredible job of trying to get Margaret Court to basically say, "Hey, I'm not going to celebrate my 50-year achievement."
Yeah.
Right? And she didn't fall for it. And in the end, they were like, "Oh, all right, I guess we have to do what we really ought to have done in the first place anyway."
And then the crowd cheered her. They gave her
Of course they
ovation.
did. Yeah. Of course they did.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Because, whatever her views about anything, that's completely separate to her achievements.
Yeah. And it's what's going on in Australia. It's why I make a point of calling Ayers Rock rather than Uluru.
Yep.
Where people who are systematically renaming everything that was named after us after somebody else.
Yes.
And what's going on in South Africa, where they've renamed a lot of the places which were named after original Dutch settlers. They're renaming it after ANC terrorists instead now.
Yep.
I think there was an airport which was actually named after a terrorist now.
Yep.
And the same thing's going on in Australia. And so,
absolutely. Yeah. My local electorate used to be called Batman.
Yes.
After John Batman, not after the superhero.
Yeah. Literally the guy who founded this
the guy who, the very first explorer in this area. And Melbourne wouldn't be here without him.
Yeah. Melbourne was nearly called Batman.
Yeah. Batmania was one of the names that was put forward for what eventually became Melbourne.
Yeah.
So we could be the Batmania Traditionalists.
I love that.
And they changed the name to Cooper, who's some Aboriginal guy.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he's important to the Aboriginal community. How many Aborigines live in Batman? I don't even know, but it's not much, you know.
Mm.
And so it's that constant erosion of our history and the idea that every part of our history is shameful.
Well, yeah, what happens if in 100 years, if we don't win, in 100 years' time, there won't be any of us here, and there will be no record of us being here?
Well, I disagree, because there will still be physical evidences,
Yes.
and people will wonder, hey, how did this get built?
Those Aborigines must have.
And that will be a bit of an embarrassment.
Yeah. I see two tangents in front of me. Let's go down one of them here. You know that they're trying to change the name of what we're allowed to call black people again.
Oh, again?
Yes, because you know how in Africa, like, we're not allowed to say certain words beginning with N.
Like Niger or Nigeria.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Even though like there's literally a country called that. Yeah. And we used to call them coloured people. But now apparently that's wrong. But you call them people of colour, even though there's literally no difference between the two.
Yeah.
And you can't call them black because and African American is sometimes it, but I think people of colour is the current one. So, and here in Australia, like, it's always been Aborigines, and then I remember a few decades ago they were saying, "Oh no, it should be Koori," but that never really caught on. But Indigenous seems to have caught on, but now they want to change it again.
All right.
To First Nations people.
All right.
I've heard just today I heard Richard Di Natale, who's retired. He referred to it to the First Nations people, and apparently there's a coach who is boycotting the word Indigenous and instead using the word First Nations, and he's trying to send a message to Australians. I didn't read any of the rest of it.
Yeah.
And basically, like, there's no difference. Like, they're literally just changing the name on a regular basis. Like, they change the name, everybody starts using the name, and they decide, right, you're all bad people, you have to use this word because that will make you better and that will be more respectful. And it's gaslighting, and it's designed just to break our thinking down and just...
Well, it actually highlights a aspect of Western civilization, and that is that we love new stuff.
Oh, yes.
And it's always, what's the latest song on the radio? What's the latest movie at the cinema? What's the newest word?
Yes.
And I just finished reading a book that was published in 1980 called New Words for Old. And it was a series of newspaper articles in England, and it was about how the English language was being changed and abused. And one of the things he talked about was one of the articles was about race, and he talked about how there used to be in the United States, black people were at one point called coloured people, and then they were called Negroes, and then they were called black, and now they're talking about changing it again, and the original term was black.
Yes.
So we went through all these changes to arrive back at the exact same phrase that we went, and each time it's politically correct to only use the current terminology. Yes. So when Negro was the accepted term, it wasn't acceptable to say black people.
Yes.
And then when it was black people, it wasn't acceptable to say Negroes, even though we're talking about the exact same people, and we all know who we're talking about.
Which just tells us that it's all about a system of control.
And and there are other people who'll say, you can't say Aboriginal, it's Indigenous. Aboriginal means first person. Indigenous means first person.
It literally means the same thing.
It actually means exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? Now, First Nation is actually a North American term.
Yes, it's like we have Native Americans.
That's right, a term used in Canada, not in the United States.
Yes.
So in the United States, you'll often hear people say, "Oh, you can't say Indians; it's Native Americans." Yeah. But Native Americans actually call themselves Indians. Right? And the main US government...
They're more sort of Mongolian and Siberian than Indian.
Well, there's two ideas about where the word Indian comes from.
Yeah.
One is that they didn't realise that they were a new people, and they just thought, hey, they're actual Indians, we've arrived in India.
Yes.
And the second is that it actually means children of God.
Oh, right.
So it comes from Latin.
Right.
Indies,
Yeah, okay.
which actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, First Nation is a term that's used in Canada, and it sort of makes sense because they actually had nations, they actually had political organisations. In Australia, the tribe is as good as it got.
Yes.
There were no nations as we understand
That's
it.
right.
And you can say the Aboriginal nation, that all Aboriginal people are one people,
Mm-hmm.
but of course that means that you obliterate all their tribal differences, which Aboriginal people don't do.
Yes.
Their tribes are actually pretty important to them.
Yes.
Because one of the bizarre things is while the Aboriginal people are pretty much the same people all across the continent, or at least were, they actually have hundreds of different languages, which is quite a bizarre set of circumstances to arrive at. One people, hundreds of languages.
Oh, well, diversity is their strength.
Well, I guess they thought it was.
Yeah.
And they still do think it is. They still do. And, you know, it was funny, I was talking to somebody about how important skin colour is within Aboriginal culture, modern Aboriginal culture,
Right.
and how people with dark skin actually call light-skinned people white people,
Yeah.
and they deny that they're Aboriginal.
Yes.
And you know, and so there's all this tension within the Aboriginal community about these issues.
They should embrace it. Diversity is their greatest strength. Like
I think I'm going to have to push you down the stairs again.
So tangenting back, sort of making our way back around. If we sort of go to World War II history, this was a great set of questions which was put up by a writer at the XYZ called True Diversity. Knowing your knowledge of history, you'll probably actually get most of these right. How many British died in World War II?
About 400,000.
How many French died in World War II?
That's a good question. I have known, but I can't remember offhand.
How many Russians died in World War II?
About 29 million.
How many Germans died in World War II?
About 6 million.
How many Australians died in World War II?
About 40,000.
How many Jews died in World War II?
Well, that's a trick question because there are Jews that died in the Australian Navy. Just to give one example. So there were many different forces which Jews died.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, as I said, like your knowledge of history is quite good. So the amount of thought that you had to put into British and American casualties, most people would have to put that kind of thought into Australian casualties as well. Not every, like I actually don't. I didn't have that on the tip of my tongue, but everybody knows how many Jews died officially. And so that's an example of like this erasure of history and how easy it is to do, because over generations you focus on certain aspects of what happened in the past, and then you lose your own connection to like your own people.
I disagree on one point. I don't think it's an erasure of the past. I think it's a concentration.
Yes.
And to the negation of everything else.
Yes.
So just to give one example, ethnic Poles. 1 in 5 ethnic Poles died in World War II. And the actual fighting that took place in Poland wouldn't even last a whole year.
Yes.
So for most of that time, they were just under occupation.
Yes, and that's where most of them died.
But still 1 in 5 of them died. But how often do we talk about the Poles?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so then again, like tangenting right back to the start, this is why I don't love the coronavirus, but this is why...
I'm glad you don't love the coronavirus.
This is why I find the whole thing fascinating, because we've got something that is so clearly a racial issue. It's something that so clearly originated in China. Something that so clearly is affecting Chinese people in China and in other countries, and we're not supposed to talk about it. All this stuff that like we've been focusing on other aspects of it. We've been erasing history. We've been focusing more on certain aspects of history than others, and there's just a certain area that we're just not supposed to talk about. All of a sudden, it's like the basic human instinct for survival makes us focus right back on that.
Yes.
That's what I find fascinating about what's going on these last couple of weeks.
And if things get worse, we will see that this will become a bigger issue.
Yeah.
And of course, that means that the media will come down much harder.
Absolutely.
On this and say, oh no, there's absolutely no issue at all.
Yeah.
And if you think there's an issue, you're the one with the problem.
Yeah. Basically, don't go to the mainstream media for information on the coronavirus. Basically, believe the conspiracy theories. Go to the conspiracy websites.
I would not do that. I would not believe the conspiracy theories because there's a lot of different conspiracies.
Yeah, they all contradict each other.
But you should view it with skepticism.
Yes.
Yeah. And at least do your own research.
Yeah. Whatever the official figure is, just add a 0. Or
that
2.
may be true.
Yeah.
That may be true.
Yeah.
Now, David, where can people find more of your thoughts?
xyz.net.au. Facebook is dying, just come straight to the website.
And are you on Gab?
Yes, we're on Gab as well.
Yeah.
We're growing on there. We have nearly 800 followers there. So we've overtaken Twitter. I'm quite happy about that. So yeah, come see us on Gab too.
And I'm Mark Moncrief, and to find more of my thoughts, come to Upon Hope. Thank you, David.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And have a good day, everyone.